If I can give you the fastest, most brutally effective way to stop missing someone, I'd tell you this. Stop remembering the highlight reel and start remembering the horror movie, because nostalgia is a liar. It edits out nights that you cried yourself to sleep, the texts they left unread, the names that they called you, the way that they question your worth. You don't miss them. You miss the version of them that never existed, the one that your mind keeps photoshopping. And today, we're going to rip that filter off. We're going to take every warm, fuzzy, but maybe they were good thought and put it under the bright light of reality until you stop wanting what was slowly killing you. By the time we're done, you won't be asking, how do I stop missing them? You'll be wondering why you ever let them stay as long as they did. Missing someone after they hurt you is like craving poison because it came in a pretty glass. You're not longing for them. You're longing for emotional highs you got in between the hits. But those good moments were like sprinkles on a moldy cake. They look nice, but they didn't stop you from swallowing rot. Today, we're going to walk through the main reasons that you need to remember exactly how they treated you. Not in a bitter way, not in a, sit in the dark and hate them type of way, but in a way that sobers you up from that intoxicating pool of missing them. Because here's the truth. Maybe they didn't cheat, but they lied. Maybe they didn't hit you, but they crushed your spirit. Maybe they didn't yell, but they ignored your pain. The specifics change, but the core truth doesn't. When you remember clearly, you stop craving blindly. Let's start with the obvious, cheating. You remember that day, don't you? That gut punch that made the air leave your lungs. The way your stomach just dropped so hard you felt sick. That numbness in your hands, that ringing in your ears. It wasn't just that they broke your heart. They shattered your entire reality. 1 minute you thought you knew who you were with, the next you realize you've been living with a stranger. Cheating isn't an accident. You don't slip into someone else's bed. You don't accidentally build weeks or months of secret conversations, shady meetups, and lies to cover your tracks. Every step was a choice, and every choice screamed, my temporary thrill matters more than your permanent trust. The Bible says in Proverbs 6:32, but a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. And here's the thing. They didn't just destroy themselves. They tried to take your trust, your security, and your self-worth down with them. So if you catch yourself missing them, you have to remember this. This is someone who saw the most sacred thing that you could give, your loyalty, and they treated it like a paper cup to be used, tossed, and replaced. You might be tempted to replay, the good days, but those days were funded by lies. If you order a soup from a restaurant, took a few bites, and find a dead fly floating on your soup, would you say, well, the first few bites were good, and keep eating it? No, you'd send it back. Cheating is that fly. So stop eating that soup. Stop missing that soup. Now let's talk about physical abuse. Missing someone who physically hurt you, it's like missing a storm that sank your boat. You don't need more waves. You need solid ground. If they ever put their hands on you in anger, that wasn't a moment of weakness. That wasn't a bad fight. That was the clearest, most unfiltered glimpse into who they really are when they think that no one can stop them. That moment, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was brewing long before the first shove, slap, or hit. See, physical abuse changes you. It makes you live in a constant state of hyper awareness. You start reading their mood like it's a weather forecast, watching for signs of a storm so you can hide before it hits. And if you had to live like you're walking through, a minefield, well, that's all the proof you need that missing them is dangerous. Missing an abusive partner is like missing a burning house because you like the curtains. Sure, maybe those curtains were beautiful. Maybe, there were some good days where the light just came in right. But the foundation was on fire. The walls were collapsing, and staying, boy, would have killed you. You don't go back to the fire that you already escaped from. You keep walking until you find a place that's safe, stable, and warm without risking burning your life. And abuse, it extends past physical side. I'm also talking about verbal abuse. Missing someone who tore you down with words is like missing poison because it came in a pretty bottle. It still destroys you, when you drink it, no matter how cute the bottle is. Some people will say, well, they never hit me, as if that means it wasn't abuse. Verbal abuse can be just as destructive, sometimes worse. The bruises from words, they aren't visible, but they last a lot longer. Maybe they mocked your dreams. Maybe they told you that you were just lucky that they even put up with you. Maybe they knew exactly which insecurity to poke when they wanted to shut you down. Every insult was like a drop of acid, small at first, but over time, it eroded the way that you saw yourself. Verbal abuse, it rewires your brain. You start to hear the voice in your head, even after they're gone. You start to see yourself through their insults instead of reality. That's why nostalgia is dangerous here. It tries to edit out all those moments and leave you with just the smiles and laughter. When you catch yourself missing them, answer that thought with the truth. You mean the person who can ruin my entire day with one sentence? The one who thought love meant cutting me down so that they could feel taller? Yeah, I think I'll pass. Let's keep going. Missing someone who neglected you is like missing a phone with no signal. You kept reaching out, but it was never capable of answering. So what exactly are you missing? Their presence? Their fantasy of what they could have been if they cared enough to try? Emotional neglect is when you're hurting and the person who's supposed to care act like it's nothing. When you're celebrating and they act like it's not a big deal. It's when your emotional needs are met with eye rolls, sighs, or indifference. That's its own, kind of like cruelty, because it makes you question your worth in a more quieter, more subtle way. It makes you wonder if you're even worth noticing. And over time, you start shrinking your own needs just to avoid feeling that rejection. Missing someone who gaslit you is like missing a prison because you got used to the walls. Freedom will always feel better once you remember what the sky looks like. Now, gaslighting is a slow poison. It's when they convince you that your memories are wrong, your feelings are invalid, and your instincts can't be trusted. You could catch them in a blatant lie, and somehow by the end of the conversation, you're apologizing. You could tell them something hurt you, and they convince you it never happened, or worse, that it was your fault. Missing someone who fed you false hope is like missing a mirage out in the desert. It looked like water when you were dying of thirst, but getting closer only proved it was never real. You see, false hope is one of the most addictive drugs in the world. They promise to change. They promise to get help. They promise to stop lying, stop cheating, stop disappearing. And for a week, maybe two, they did, but by then the cycle reset. Every "I'm sorry" became the opening act for the same show that you've already seen. Hope is beautiful, but false hope is a cage. It keeps you in a place waiting for the version of them that you wish existed to finally show up, but that version, it doesn't exist. Missing someone who tried to control you is like missing a puppet master. The strings, well, they might feel familiar, but they never were freedom. Understand that control, it rarely starts loud. It starts small. They make jokes about, you going to the gym without them. They pout when you go see your friends. They plant seeds of doubt in your head, about your family. And over time, your world gets smaller and smaller until the only person left is them. The Bible says in Galatians 5:13, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Love's not a cage. If they kept you in one, they weren't loving you. They were owning you. And you're not property. Missing someone who constantly publicly disrespects you, it's like missing the bully who pushed you in the mud. You might dry off, but the stain of disrespect, it stays. You see, public humiliation is a special kind of cruelty because it's not just about hurting you, it's about showing everyone else that they can. Maybe they embarrass you in front of friends. Maybe they shared things you told them in confidence. Maybe they turned your private pain into a joke at your expense. That's not harmless teasing. That's a display of power. And finally, missing someone who didn't care when you were hurting is like missing an umbrella full of holes. It was there, but it never kept you dry the moments you needed them the most. Now, maybe you were grieving. Maybe you were facing a health scare. Maybe you were overwhelmed, anxious, or just in need of comfort. And they acted like it was nothing. That's not being busy. That's being absent. And love without presence isn't love at all. You see, the fastest way to stop missing them is to stop romanticizing the scraps as if they were a feast. You don't miss them. You miss the fantasy version that never existed. And when you finally see them for who they really were, you won't just stop missing them. You'll start missing yourself less, because every day without them is another day that you're getting you back.